Welcome to Interesting People. My name is Tom Lorentzen, and I'm the host of the show. It's brought to you under the auspices of the Chabot Los Positas Community College District in Hayward, California. The premise of the show is that there are interesting people everywhere. One doesn't have to be famous to have led a significant and important life. Today, we are on board the USS Hornet in Alameda, California. And my guest today is a man who served on board this ship as a fighter pilot during the Korean War with the USS Navy. His name is Mr. Dale Berven. So Dale, we're sitting here in one of the rooms on the USS Hornet. Share with the audience and myself a bit about how you ended up going into the Navy and what brought you into the Navy and how did you end up becoming a pilot?
Oh, that's very simple. I graduated from San Leandro High School in January of '48. In those days, we had two graduations, and I was in the January class of '48. At that time, when you turned 18, you had to register for the draft. Lo and behold, in early 1950, the Korean War started. I was going to San Francisco State College. I did not want to get drafted. So I joined the Naval Air Reserve at the Oakland Airport, at the old NAAS Oakland. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a very young, naive person, but here I was wearing a sailor outfit, and I figured that this was going to keep me out of being drafted. One day while I was on station there, a pilot came up and asked us, who would like to go for an airplane ride? I had never been in an airplane. So I would. So anyhow, he was going to fly a TBF Avenger torpedo bomber. It carries the pilot and had two other places for people to sit. So I went up into this airplane. I came home and I was enthralled. Man, I says, I enjoy that. So I put in for naval air training down in Pensacola, and I was accepted. I reported down there on 2 January 1951. I had just turned 21, and I looked about 17. Anyhow, I went through flight training, and that's how I became a naval aviator. I got my wings in April of '52 and stayed in until January of '55. So that was my experience in the Navy, just those 4-some years, but I think it helped me become somewhat of a leader instead of a follower, which I had been all my life. I now was a leader.
And you said that in order to be a pilot, you have to be kind of cocky. So at one point, you feel you were sort of a follower, and then you became a leader. And so where did this energy, this ability to fly a plane and to go from being a follower to a leader come from?
Well, you became cocky after you had about 20 hours in the air in the basic training, and pretty soon the instructor, we landed on this one auxiliary field, and he got out of the plane. He says, it's yours, take off. Holy mackerel. So here I am by myself behind the controls of this SNJ Texan trainer, and I took off and I flew around, and I'll tell you, my cockiness just went up. I landed, got out, and he gave me the thumbs up that I had actually passed the basic training portion of it and soloed. I was so happy. I wrote back to my parents that I had done that, and every flight after that, you just became more and more confident in your ability to fly an aircraft.
And then with the Korean War taking place, you were placed, how soon after you graduated from Pensacola did you go into the Korean conflict, and what ship did you go on to?
Oh, that was really a shock, because after I soloed there, I was in Pensacola, Florida, and also Corpus Christi, Texas. In Corpus Christi, I was flying the F-6 Hellcat, the Navy's best propeller fighter plane during World War II. And I qualified 11 landings on the carrier and became a naval aviator. That was in April. And then I went to jet training down in Kingsville, Texas. I flew jets for the first time. And lo and behold, they sent me to the West Coast to get into a squadron. That was in September. And I figured, oh, the Korean War is going on. I'm going to have like eight months of training. We left December that year to head out for Korea. So I was really only flying our Grumman Panther jet for about 3.5 months training, and lo and behold, I'm going to be fighting into a war. It was a little, that was about the only time I was a little shaky until I got a few missions under my belt, and I figured out, hey, we can survive this, God willing.
What was that first mission like? What do you recall on that first time you went in to fly a combat mission?
Tom, I can't remember that. I don't remember what I had for dinner last night. All I know is that the very first mission that you had, you were usually on a relatively simple one where there weren't a lot of anti-aircraft guns. They knew where the more heavily defended places would be. You had to have a few missions under your belt before you got the really tough ones.
And during the war, you served on another carrier, not on the Hornet?
Yeah, the Hornet was decommissioned during that time. This ship was back on the East Coast, and we boarded, my squadron and we boarded the USS Philippine Sea, CVA 47, a sister ship of this. And so on the Phil Sea, I wound up with 90 missions over Korea. And we even flew the last day of the war. And if you were talking about, were we nervous about anything? The last mission. We knew the war was going to end that particular day, and yet they sent us out of a mission. And the reason we were possibly a little worried, one of my roommates got shot down the day before and got killed in action. And here, what a waste. He was such a great pilot and a great young man. And so anyhow, we were able to land back aboard carefully, safely, and thank goodness that things worked out.
When the war ended then, you remained in the Navy for a while after that?
The war ended in late '53, and then we came home. We got home off the, 53. Then we boarded the Hornet, this one, in '54. We made a round-the-world cruise in '54. And after the world cruise, we got back to the Alameda area right here in December of '54. And I was separated from the service in January of '55. And from there, I went back to San Francisco State to finish my education, and wound up where I helped open Castro Valley High School in 1956. I was one of the original teachers.
We're going to go into that a little bit further, and but on that world cruise, the purpose of the cruise was any particular purpose to show our presence with the carrier, or what you said that was a highlight of your time?
Well, you are correct. It was to show what we had, but it was known as the 1954 World Goodwill Cruise. We were stationed at Alameda. We flew all of our planes to Norfolk, Virginia. From there, we boarded the Hornet, and then we took off, and we hit places like Lisbon, Portugal for 4 days, Naples, Italy for 4 days. We went through the Suez Canal. At that time, we were the largest ship to have ever passed through the Suez Canal. We went down to Colombo, Ceylon, and then we went to Singapore. And from Singapore, we went back up to the Philippines. And then we started patrolling off of Formosa, which is now Taiwan, and off of Vietnam. Actually, we were trying to show we had our military power there supporting the people from Formosa, from the Chinese communists. And at that time, in 1954, in July, is when the Hainan Incident happened, where we went out on search and rescue to see if we could assist in recovering any of the survivors of that aircraft. Thank goodness some of them got out. So.
Now, on that world cruise, were there other ships involved with the Hornet?
Oh, yeah. Guess what? The Phil C was involved. In fact, during the Hainan Incident, following the shooting down of the British airliner, 2 days later, 2 planes from the Phil C shot down 2 communist planes. And so at that time, even during Korea, the previous year, there were usually 2, 3, or 4 aircraft carriers into a task force. The ship wasn't by itself. That is so different from right now. For example, if the Ronald Reagan, our super nuclear carrier, it has its support vessel, but it's the only aircraft carrier. Same way with the Stennis or any of the other CVNs.
So that was to a large degree, a diplomatic trip. You say it was a goodwill trip to show our diplomatic side, but also our military strength at the same time.
Correct.
Okay. And how long did that world cruise?
7 months.
7 months.
7 months, and we got to see some really great places. But you know what? The ship, when I was aboard it, for some reason, I didn't care the way it was being operated. We had a change of command. The captain had been changed, and there was other things. Plus the fact the people who are flying in the air group are referred to as the Brown Shoe Navy. The sailors aboard the ship are the Black Shoe Navy. So there's always a little bit of between the brown shoe and the black shoe, plus the fact that we were a West Coast air group and the Hornet was an East Coast vessel. So you had the brown shoe versus the black shoe. You had the West Coast against the East Coast. All I can say is that it upset me a little bit, and I simply said, if this is the way the Navy's going to be run, I don't want any part of it. So I was so happy to get off of the Hornet, even though it was a great tour. And you know what? I've been a docent here for 19 years, and I love every bit of it because of the people that I work with and with the intent of why the Hornet is here.
With that, Dale, and clarifying back with the audience too, I first met you in 1959 when I started high school at Castro Valley High School in Castro Valley, California, and you were Coach Berven and Mr. Berven. And so now, as a friend, I can call you Dale, but still remember so clearly the respect that people had for you at Castro Valley High during the years that I went there, 1959 to 63. But you, after you left the Navy then, you went back to become a teacher and educator. You went to San Francisco State, is that where you went?
I went to San Francisco State and wound up eventually having a master's degree in education. But I had 33 great years in the Castro Valley District. I helped open this school, and I was the last of the original teachers when I retired in '89. My field was in physical education, a major in PE and a minor in math. I taught that. I became athletic director besides coaching, and I was also in administration for 3 years, but I didn't like administration. I enjoyed the teaching part because you had a good relationship with the kids, whereas in administration, you could do no right. Either the kids didn't like you, the parents didn't like you, or the other teachers didn't like you because you didn't enforce all of the rules and regulations.
Now, in teaching mathematics, did you teach algebra, geometry?
Basically algebra. I did teach geometry, and I did teach solid geometry and trigonometry, but I enjoyed teaching algebra as the most.
Now, one thing that I've learned about you, Dale, is that people have stayed in touch with you that went through high school, that were students there, and you've stayed in touch with them. You have friends going back to the beginning, virtually your teaching career, people like me and even before. What was the real value you got out of teaching? What's your best memories of all those years?
Seeing people like yourself become very stable and qualified citizens and doing well. I think that this is one of the things that helped in coaching too, because in coaching you had a good rapport with the athletes, and it upsets me to see some of these high-priced athletes these days. I don't think they are true role models of the way that they carry themselves, the way they act. Whereas if you ask a lot of the former students and athletes who is the role model in school, a lot of them would say the coach.
Now, you coached wrestling and football both. Is that correct?
I was assistant football coach. I was head wrestling coach. I was JV baseball coach, assistant track coach, head boys soccer coach, and we also had co-ed badminton, and I was the coach for that.
Now, your dad had been a teacher too, right? He had been a coach as well?
My dad was a coach at Fremont High School in Oakland. He was a head wrestling coach, and in 3 years, in 60, 61, and 62, we competed against Fremont. So it was Berven against Berven. So.
And who won? Berven?
Berven won. The first time, believe it or not, we tied.
Really?
My dad was a very successful coach, and his Fremont team usually, not all the time, but usually won the OAL, Oakland Athletic League Championship. And the second and third time, my team won. We did not win the league championship. Hayward won that, but we also tied for the North Coast section championships following the league championship. So I had outstanding wrestlers.
Now, in high school, college, did you wrestle and play football yourself?
I played football 1 year at San Francisco State, and I had a serious knee injury, and that was it. No, I did not wrestle, but I picked up wrestling hints from my dad. Also wrestled intramurals when I was in flight training and what have you.
Mm-hmm. Now, as the years have gone by, you retired from Castro Valley High School in 1989. You were the last of the original teachers there, went open in 1956, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you retired in 1989, you were the last of the original teachers there. And then you got involved here with the USS Hornet, where you're still teaching and doing educational roles. Tell us about the Hornet as a learning institution. What type of things take place here on the USS Hornet?
It is an educational museum. We tried to keep it as much original as possible. We offer educational classes in various forms. And we think that when I say we, the majority of the volunteers, and there are plenty, not just docents, but they're in security. They're also in the restoration, and then they have another thing called the air group that are doing various parts of it. The docents, we have about close to 80 active docents, so we're the largest volunteer group. But people who are volunteers feel that there's a definite need for the Hornet to be here because we are giving citizens of this area the opportunity to become educated about the tremendous history of this ship and also what happened during the middle part of the last century. It is amazing how much people don't know about what happened in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Let me give you an example, and I don't want to go on too much on this because I have plenty of examples. But one time I was asking a group of people who was the first man on the moon. And it's Neil Armstrong, if the visitors don't know that. But anyhow, nobody could answer. And so a woman leaned over and whispered in her daughter's ear, and the daughter was probably 8 years old. And the little girl raised her hand and gave me a name, and I almost died of a heart attack right there.
The name was?
Teddy Roosevelt. Now, you had this usual reaction to that. And if I go out and talk to service groups or what have you, I say, I'm going to tell you something that it's going to sound funny to you, but it's really not funny. It's a tragedy. Here's another one. I got about 2 or 3 more. Get off. A son asked his dad on this ship, who was JFK? And the dad's reply was, he was the head of NASA. We had a son ask his dad, this is a different one now, what's Pearl Harbor? And the reply was from the father. That's when Vietnam attacked the United States and started the Vietnamese War. So you have things like that. I have about 38 of them. We feel that we are doing a real service through education. And if people ask me, why is the Hornet here? I say there's one word. It's a 9-letter word. And this one word contains the 5 important vowels of A, E, I, O, U. And that word is education. If you could just come aboard to tour the ship, the docents will give you really great educational tours. If you are in the schools, there are various types of educational classes we have, that even including the STEM, the science, technology, electronics, and mathematics portion of it. So we feel that we are really reaching out to people, whereas they may not know too much from other areas.
But yeah, it's an aside there, but I had the privilege of attending the memorial service for Neil Armstrong at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and the memory stands out so clear in me how important the whole element was of what transpired in the race to the moon, the space endeavors, and the military matters. But going back here to the Hornet, you have school groups that come on here from local schools. Do they include high school or elementary or a combination? And what about college students? What type of things can they learn here?
We've had a few college groups, but it's primarily, you'll have the primary schools come in, we have middle schools come in, and we have senior high schools. And there are different types of programs that fit the needs for each of those groups. And so all they have to do is to contact the education department, and Heidi will take care of them and explain it. You can also find it out if you look on the Hornet website. It talks about the different educational tours that are offered. Another big thing where we find people are learning something, we have what's called liveaboards. People come aboard ship, say on Saturday afternoon, they bring their sleeping bags, they sleep over. Last week we had close to 400 people sleeping on here. We've had 500 people over there, and they are given a berthing area. They have a catered dinner coming in. They are offered tours from 7 p.m. until 10 p.m. And then they even have ghost stories afterwards. And they're able to, and they get a hot breakfast the next morning, and they can continue to stay on for a while and to tour the ship. So great opportunities for people to visit this historic ship. This ship is as historic as practically any one that had happened in the past 50 years.
You know, Dale, with your career in the Navy, on the Hornet here and elsewhere during your years in the Navy, and then as an educator and a teacher, you're a young man, and if I don't mind, I might say you're 87? Is that a good guess?
87.
Looking back, and many more years to come, with all that you've seen through your Navy career, your educational career, and life in general, I always like to reach out to younger people that hopefully will watch this show. And what lessons do you feel are the most important lessons you've learned that you'd like to pass on to young people with school groups coming on here, and to viewers that are of young age watching this program?
There's basically two things. And I know I'm going to sound like their parents, their grandparents, their minister, their priest, their chaplain, what have you. Number one is hit the books. You can still have fun in school, but go ahead and try to get as much learning that you have, because the decisions you make now will affect you later on. Now, later on, for those that are retiring or thinking of retirement, keep active. I have a motto. Think about it. To rest is to rust. If you don't do anything, you're going to fall apart. That's right. And I've been trying to do that for the past years.
Those are excellent lessons. And Dale, I'd like to take liberty to say something here too. As a student who went to Cathedral High School, when you taught and coached there, and the privilege of being here on the USS Hornet where you served, and as I look back now on things too, I realize how exceptional our country is. And what makes our country exceptional, I think, are individuals like you, Dale, during your military career and your educational career. So I'd like to take the liberty and say thank you for being on the show. Thank you for your service in the military, and thank you for your service as an educator.
Thank you.
We are all benefiting from that.